Hey guys, it's me, everyone's favorite OM System employee, Michaela. I'm back on another episode of OM System Live. This week is going to be one of our community features where we bring on photographers just like you who do different styles of photography. And this week, our subject matter is both up close and far away. So we're going to have two different awesome photographers who photograph two awesomely different subjects join us and share their tips and tricks tonight. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Let's see, the do's and the don'ts. So we will go through, introduce our photographers, go through some of their images, and then we'll do a Q&A after each of their segments. So we will try to answer any questions you might have for them. If you are tuning in, but you can't watch the whole thing, or if you're tuning in late and you're wondering, is this being recorded? Yes, it absolutely is being recorded, and you can definitely watch it at a later date. It will live both on our YouTube channel and our Facebook page for the US. Let's see. I think that kind of covers the housekeeping. I see a ton of people from Canada tonight and from Australia. Good morning to our Australian friends. Some Poland, Denmark. So we got people from all over tonight. And of course, a few Californians like me. Awesome. All right. So should we meet our first guest? I think we should meet our first guest. You maybe know from the Instagrams. He is Ben. Ben, how's it going?
Hi, it's going great. How are you doing?
I'm alive. I'm very sweaty in my studio. Well,
thank you.
So what are you going to talk about tonight? What is your subject?
Well, I'm going to talk about bug photography, more specifically kind of bug portrait photography. Before that, I want to say thank you for having me on this. I'm not nervous at all. I'm very nervous, but we'll get through it. And just a little bit about myself. I currently reside in Northern Virginia with my amazing wife who puts up with my bug shenanigans. We have three small, very young kids and a dog named Charlie. I got into macro photography at the beginning of the pandemic. I was kind of looking for a creative outlet. I've been into portrait photography and landscape type stuff for a few years before that. But I had some extension tubes with my full frame camera, and I decided to play around with it. And it was such an awful experience. I stopped and then I didn't really understand the mechanics of it at all. And I was trying, taking shots at f2.8 and realizing it was like such a razor hair of focal plane. But so I kind of put that away for a while, and then had a conversation with my sister, who's a wedding photographer in Wisconsin, where I'm originally from. And we were talking about some macro gear and stuff. And so I decided to give it another shot and really got into it because I didn't have much else going on, during the pandemic. Couldn't really go anywhere. You weren't really taking on clients and no travel. So I decided to play around with the extension tubes, and then eventually bought some dedicated macro lenses. And then I just kind of kept I kind of call it camera laundering when I change gear. Don't tell my wife how much it costs because it's just you're swapping out gear. And I did that for a while, and I was a full frame user up until actually the beginning of this year, and then I made the switch to OM Systems. I bought an EM1 Mark II in the 60mm macro, and within the past 3 or 4 months, this macro season, I'd say I've gotten some of my best images that I've ever had. So it was a great switch, and I'm excited to see kind of where it goes from here.
I just want you to know that you have an entire fan club happening in the comment section right now. There's a lot of somebody says London, the entirety of London loves Ben. So you've got that going for you.
Well, that's fantastic. And I love London as well. So that is mutual there.
Yeah, everybody is very excited to hear what you have to say. So yeah, let's jump. I mean, so
Sure.
you switched from full frame. It's okay to tell
I
us where
did.
you came from. Where did you come
Sure.
from?
So I had a high resolution. I had the Nikon Z7 mirrorless camera, which was the form factor of that from the DSLR. I started with the Nikon D850,
Mm-hmm.
also a high megapixel camera, and I was using also the Venus Laowa 100 millimeter 2x magnification macro. So when I was shooting with that, I started to understand, the mechanics and the physics of macro photography and the difference with sensor sizes. Um, and I knew that micro four thirds was the way to go for macro. And I had a lot of people in my Instagram corner that rooting for that as well. The the depth of field you're able to get from micro four thirds field of view, the smaller
Mm.
sensor size, um, it's just it's more economical, and the main three, just being able to carry around this smaller camera. I'll go to the park and I'll just hold it in my hand for 3 hours, whereas before with the Nikon, I had all sorts of weird gear to hold it in place. I'm pretty sure it screwed up my back at one point. But the images, I had some concerns, going from 45 megapixels to 20 megapixels, but the the pixel density of the micro four thirds, if you extrapolate that to a full frame camera, that's actually like a 67 megapixel full frame sensor. So if you're someone that crops a lot on full frame, um, you know, you you can do that with Olympus as well. And really what you're able to do is you're able to fill the frame more with micro four thirds, and you're able to really see the picture, and you're able to take less shots with the deeper focal planes and stuff. And I can tell I'm rambling. I love talking about this stuff. But what I want to get across is that I don't think I never look back. That I still have the Nikon for some portrait photography and stuff like that, and it is kind of collecting dust. So I love and the camera I'm using is from 2016, so it's not like I'm even using the latest and greatest from OM Systems. So I'm really making the most of the gear, and yeah, like I said, I feel like I've gotten some of the best images within these past few months with it. So
I I would agree. I stalk your Instagram, and I know half the comment section does as well. And I think that some of your best work has come out in the past couple weeks, but I'm biased,
well, thank you for that.
So, what else is in your bag other than, I mean, the 60 macro? That's really common
Mhm.
especially when it comes to bug photography. It's a very popular choice. But what else do you keep in your bag that's kind of like your go-to when you're on the hunt for bugs?
So I like using, if I need a little more magnification, I have the Raynox DCR 250, and that's a close-up lens. That's a +8 diopter. It's really just a highly calibrated piece of glass that lets you focus closer. Um, it comes with a little adjustable thing that you need a step down ring, I believe, or step up ring. Anyways, it has a little springy thing you can clip to it, but I actually bought a step down lens, so I screw it in. But it's easy to take off if there's a bigger subject. I found with the Raynox on the 60 millimeter, it's equivalent or close to equivalent to 1.5 times magnification on the Olympus, so about 3 to 1 on a full frame. And being able to use things like the built-in focus bracketing at that magnification, and I could always include extension tubes and things of that nature for more magnification. So, but I use that. I'm comfortable with that magnification, so I always have that on. I also use a fabulous diffuser made by my man Brendan in Australia. It's really having soft light, widespread light and I touch on this a little later in my tips, is extremely valuable in macro photography. I started by making my own diffusers out of Pringles cans. There's a lot of videos on YouTube on how to do that. The problem with that though is there's not enough light spread to really make a pleasing looking image. So Brendan has Olympus. He's always been using Olympus over there in Australia. So he really has fine-tuned this diffuser for those cameras. And I absolutely love that thing. And if I need to travel, it comes off really easy and just folds up flat on itself. So other than that, I wrote down 2 headlamps. Why do I have 2 headlamps? Oh, I have 2 headlamps. I like to shoot at night and in the early morning. I also use a headlamp for a focusing light that's in the back end of the flash and shooting through the diffuser. So I'll be wearing one and I'll have one in there for early mornings, late night. It's surprising the amount of bugs you will find with a powerful headlamp on, especially spiders and wolf spiders. During certain times of the summer, I'll shine that headlamp across my yard and you'll see like 12 of them crawling through the grass. So if you didn't know that, spiders are everywhere.
They're all over my garage.
Oh yeah, they're everywhere. Also, I have a clamp that I take with me. A lot of people make them on their own. I bought mine. I probably could have made it on my own. But what it is a flexible, extendable arm with a clamp and a twist with like a more high precision clamp on the other end. And I'll use that if I find a subject in the early morning that's kind of resting, I'll take a stick or a leaf and I'll try and lead it onto that object. And then I'll set up the clamp so then I can stabilize myself for either single shots or focus stacking, but I'm mostly for focus stacking. Finally, well, other than batteries and memory cards, which are pretty obvious why you would take that, have that in my bag. Snacks, you want your blood sugar levels to be okay, because when you're focus stacking, you really don't want to be shaking too much. Exactly. And I highly recommend Quest bars. I like the chocolate chip flavor. They have cookies and cream though. They have like a white raspberry truffle. I'm not promoting Quests at all, but I should be. Okay, and that's all I have for my bag.
I just want you to know that I think somebody in the comments is calling you out. I think it's probably your wife telling you that you have 8 headlamps. I think that's too many. Too many headlamps. We gotta pare this down a little bit.
That's definitely my wife, and I had a trial and error period of finding a good headlamp. So I do have too many headlamps.
There's a very specific headlamp that you need for macro, apparently.
Well, I like the one I actually found or created a PNG of is the one I use. Actually, that brand you can find, it's like Slonek or something. It might be a little too much for some people. It is blinding, but I do like using that. It's like a spotlight out at night. I don't know how many lumens it is, but it's crazy.
All right, let's get into some of your photos. Let's see what you do. Let's show everyone what you do in case they haven't seen.
These are some very vibrant images. You can see down there it says understanding macro opportunities. So I kind of wanted to lightly touch on my my philosophy with macro and what I've kind of been able to develop over the past few years with shooting macro. And that's really seizing the opportunities when they present themselves and knowing when you don't really have a good macro opportunity. So each one of these images was actually not on a macro hunt, not on a nature walk. It was either early in the morning when I was supposed to be watching the kids, late in the evening when I was supposed to be watching the kids, or in the middle of the day when I was supposed to be watching the kids. But that's kind of what macro is like. I'm not forcing these, beautiful creatures into these situations. And I'm finding them in these situations where they're kind of resting. You never know. Some of them may be end of life. Some of them may just have not been able to get home, like because of rain or things of that nature. So when you stumble upon something like this, I find it critical to kind of take advantage of that or just be ready to take advantage of that. And the red paper wasp it was resting on our front stoop when I went to take out the trash. And actually, my wife has a video. I tried stacking it with my 3-year-old and 1.5-year-old crawling all over my back because I was supposed to be watching them. And then the honeybee there was actually me and the kids and the wife were playing on the back deck late afternoon, and it had a rough landing. We have a hive in our yard, but it had a rough landing on the deck. Didn't want to step on it, so my wife moved it to a mint plant we had, and she asked me, she was like, "Do you want to macro this?" And I said, "No, that's okay. Like we're watching the kids." But then it kind of propped itself up in this stance here, and I looked at her again. I was like, "Okay, can I go grab my gear?" And I did, and it worked out. And that's a blue. It's actually a plant, a blue plastic pot behind it,
nice.
so it's not the sky. And then same thing with this sweat bee at the end. We saw it. We're walking in our backyard, and it was just on a low branch, and it was on a leaf, and it wasn't really moving. And that's not very common for sweat bees. They're kind of rocketing through the air and stuff. And so we left it. It wasn't a great time, but I did come back as soon as the kids were asleep, and it was still there, and it just moved slightly. I wasn't able to get too deep of a stack on it. See, I have 7 frames on it, and I had to change my settings. A lower f-stop. I needed a deeper depth of field because the antenna were moving a little bit. But you see every once and again on Instagram and Reddit and some other places, you'll see an insect that you could see is either dead or it was. Some people do drug insects. You kind of lose a certain aspect of this hobby and appreciating nature for what it is and respecting nature, and treating your subject with kindness. And so that's why, like, these opportunities that may be so rare, you really want to take advantage of them. And I'm always looking. And I'm literally always I do get yelled at. I'll have a kid like in the harness in front of me, and I'll be supposed to be watching another kid on the ground. I'll be like looking up at a tree. But that's kind of just a little bit of my philosophy. And on the other end of that, I don't want to call it wasting time, because it's not wasting time, but I won't put too much energy into a subject midday, something that's like crawling around on a leaf. I'm not going to go out there and try and take photos of this thing that's clearly like going about its business, because one, I'm not going to get many good photos, and two, it's doing something. So I just wanted to break down that part of my philosophy a little bit.
So you go out morning, night, no midday, because you're also going to have terrible lighting anyway. It's going to be sunny and gross.
Yeah, that's not, yeah. And even with even if you're in the shade in the middle of the day, there's almost too much ambient light to use some of the photo stacking things you want. Right. Specifically on the Mark II, because the max shutter speed for the focus bracketing is 1/50th of a second. I know for the OM1, I believe it bumped up to 1/100th of a second, and I look forward to moving to that in the future. But that's too much ambient light. Your flash isn't going to overpower it enough to get a good sharp non-moving subject. So
awesome. I'm multitasking, guys. Bear with me. I don't know if you guys know this, but I'm the awesome, super cool host of the show, but I'm also like the producer in the back end, and I go through all the comments. So if I mess anything up, I need you guys all to cut me some slack. All right. Hopefully this loads. I want it to play the cute GIF.
It's okay if it doesn't, but I can. Oh, yeah, it came up.
Yay, we did it. Technology.
So I know I'm probably rambling and taking too much time already, but I wanted to break down. I do get a lot of people that ask me about my focus stacking techniques. And back when I was using the Nikon, they don't, and other full frame systems, they don't have a built-in focus bracketing feature that you can use handheld. The Nikon did have focus bracketing in it, but you had to activate it through a menu, and there was no way you would lose your focus point. So you could use it on a tripod, but you couldn't use it on the go. You couldn't look at a subject and just turn it on. So I absolutely love that about this camera, and it was one of the main reasons why I moved over to OM System. But what I do though is I try and bring the subject to the ground, so I can kind of turn myself into a tripod. You can see the very advanced graphics that I designed over there. It's supposed to be me sitting on the ground. I have a plant there with a stick and a butterfly, but that's kind of, 9 out of 10 times, if I'm trying to do a heavy stack of something, I'm usually in that position. And this goes back to my philosophy. If I have a subject that's moving around or does, I'm not going to attempt to do that. So I only really do this when I encounter a subject that is, resting, or it's just being still. That's why I go out at night in the early mornings, because I wouldn't be able to do this type of photography without those kind of still subjects. The bottom GIF, which I don't think it's for, well, is how I used to do it. So with the OM system camera and the focus bracketing, all you have to do is hold there as steady as possible. So I'll have my elbows and my knees, and I will manually focus right in front of the subject, and then I'll just click the button. And I have preset parameters. I usually have it set way too high for the amount of shots I need, which is fine for me because I've had some in before it reached the back of the focal plane I wanted, and I'll just let it do its thing. And the great thing about it is when it starts over, when it ends, it goes back to the beginning. So you can kind of reapproach and look at your angle, look at your photos, and make sure. And that's something I like to do, is make sure I have a dead on shot. I like to make sure the angle I have down low or up high is what I'm looking for. And one thing I do specifically is I always use the live view on that, because I wouldn't be able to get the angles that I do, not specifically in that GIF, but I do a lot of angles from down below going up, and you wouldn't be able to do that laying on the ground or looking through the viewfinder. So I'm always using that live view.
Nice.
And the other way you can stack, and the way I used to, is you essentially push through the subject. You set it for manual focus, and what I started with is I would take a photo, click, move forward slightly, click, move forward, and then eventually it became I set it to 5. I have a 5 frame per second burst, and then you just hold down the shutter and you slightly move the camera forward. I know I have some Canadian friends, that shoot as high as 12 to 15 frames per second. So a lot of people think, how are you able to do these focus stacks of living subjects? Well, if you think about doing, 5 to 15 frames per second, it's just a slight push forward, and it doesn't take up a considerable amount of time. And if you're worried about, well, how are you able to stack these images? Because you're clearly doing this with your hands. The software used for stacking is fantastic at taking images that are all over the place and aligning them. And starting with Photoshop, which is how I started, and then going to some more stacking specific software like Helicon Focus, which is what I use. There's Doreen Stacker, and there's some other ones out there. They can really do a good job of taking photos that are all over the place and meshing them together. So if you think you need to be on a tripod, you definitely, 2022, you do not need to use a tripod for focus stacking.
We're in the future.
We are, yes.
All right, let's take a look at some more. Oh, I love this one. This was my daughter's favorite out of all your photos today.
Yeah, so this is a female tan jumping spider. I'm not going to get into the scientific name because I'm terrible at those. But this was actually a handheld focus stack that I did with the push stack method, because she was moving around quite a bit. With jumping spiders that end up like coming into the house, I will put them through a mini photo shoot and then let them go on their merry way. So what I do, though, for jumping spiders specifically, is I will set them up on the kind of an elevated platform where they have to look, they look down, and they're not going to just jump off. They kind of are curious about their new surroundings. And that's kind of, you can get them kind of to freeze for a little bit. But this one was still moving a lot. So instead of sitting there and pressing a button and waiting for it, I just kept going around trying to look for little moments and pauses, and I'd push through. So I set it to 5 frames per second. It might have been even 8 frames per second. And I was just looking for moments, and I just held the shutter down and pushed through. And I ended up getting one dead on, which I was pretty happy with, and just enough of the I like getting right to the back of the head there, and I like getting the two pedipalps in focus there. So it's just enough in focus to be what I thought was a good image.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have the hardest time nailing focus on these little guys. I try, and I have one that'll I get these in my house all the time, and they climb up and down the windows, and I always try to do the same thing. I like bring out lights and colored paper, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
ooh, I'm gonna do a photo shoot with you, but I've never nailed.
And
I'm
then it
seriously
just,
like,
yeah.
I zoomed in on this. I hope that you guys are watching on actual computers. You can see his diffuser in the eyes of this spider.
Yeah.
So impressive.
Well, that's something too. That's something that I started working on once I started really analyzing my images. Was you start to look at things like that, and to me, the most pleasing eye reflection you get on a jumping spider is that circular diffusion shape. If you see like a box or sometimes even twin flashes, it looks great. They can look great, but for me, like, I like the kind of, because it looks like almost like an anime, type, or it looks like it has pupils. And I'll post these on Facebook and some groups, and people will be like, "Are those its pupils?" And it's like, "Nope, that's actually the lens, and it's a diffuser." And I'll go, I'll explain the process. But I know the Cygnus Tech diffuser is great for this kind of reflection, though, which I really like.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Ooh.
Night macro.
Ooh.
So this, when I put it together, I really like the eyes like go up on kind of an angle there. But I wanted to show off. So these are all night specific subjects that I've gotten within the past few months. And just one of the the benefits of going out at night and finding these subjects are kind of just not really looking to move around a lot. And especially if there's a shift in temperature. I think all these were actually pretty early on in the spring, so it was really cool out. I know the fly in the middle was on our swing set, and it was massive. And I had a stick, and I was just like, it's just hanging out. So I put the stick right in front of it, and it just climbed on to the edge, and it stayed there. So I ran, and I got my little clamp, and I put it up in the yard, and I'm sitting in the middle of the grass when I'm supposed to be taking the dog out to walk at night. My wife was probably wondering where I was.
I like that you've narked yourself out so many times today.
It's natural. I do it often. And then that hairy-footed flower bee was the same thing. It was resting on the side of our house. Definitely not where it was wanted to be. And I put a stick in front of it to see if it would climb on, and it climbed on, and it actually kind of clenched on there that you can see. And now this was another push stack because it was moving around. It was moving its rear around a lot. So I didn't really want to get into the mechanics of the auto bracketing and kind of the thinner. So I think if you could scroll up, I forgot what f-stop I was at, but I'm pretty sure I did a quick push stack through it. Yeah, F9. So I didn't know if it was going to work or not because it was moving so much. So I use, F9, which I feel comfortable at certain magnifications using for single shots, just in case it didn't. But no, I pushed through and I got some in the front and some in the back. So those eyes are kind of flat, so I could have used one at F9. And then I have the wolf spider over there at the end. Like I said, there's wolf spiders all over the place. This one was actually we have some railroad ties in the back. And when I approached it, it kind of flattened itself to the ground and stayed there. And what I like to do with wolf spiders is get kind of on a parallel level with it. It's hard because they're usually in the grass, so they're somewhere where you can't set the lens down on a parallel level. But this one is actually close enough to the edge of the wood that I really tried to take advantage of that. And it's something I try to do with wolf spiders. I don't know why, because they look great from above, they look great from the side, but it's just kind of an aesthetic that I've started to aim for in my photography. You'll notice that it's just like a lot of eye level type shots. And but yeah, so I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. I love going out at night, and it's crazy the amount of stuff. Now that it's a little warmer, especially here in Northern Virginia, things are a little more active, but you'll find a lot more stuff with a flashlight than you would midday in the blazing sun. And you can it's easier to do the bracketing because at 1/50th the shutter speed, You're not going to have too much ambient light that's going to create any, less sharp or hazy or fuzzy areas. So the pitch black really works well with that.
Do y'all not have mosquitoes then in Virginia?
So we do.
Because I don't go out at night because of the mosquitoes.
My children look like they have chicken pox right now because the
Right.
amount of mosquito bites. I've built up some sort of immunity or some sort of, I don't know what it is. They will come in and bite me, but I don't get the bite marks anymore. I don't know. I should probably get tested for something.
For some mutant X gene.
I have no idea. Yeah, this is my superpower, and it's awful.
No, that's awesome. I went hiking in the woods this weekend, and I also look like I have chicken pox pretty much everywhere. So me and your kids, we're rocking.
The last time I've actually had to itch I actually had one on my forehead last night that my wife squashed. I got blood all over the place. I have nothing. So I don't know.
Must be lucky.
I need to be studied. Someone study me. I don't know what this is.
Let me just check through. Oh yeah, I think we have 2 more of your slides.
Yeah.
This one's cool. What is
this? So this one, oh my goodness, you know what? I only have the scientific name of this. There's no way I can remember what it is, but it was a very small, pinky-sized little moth that I actually captured last weekend, not too long ago. And this was one that was actually, I used another technique for stacking that I've seen some of my macro peers promote recently. And with the Rainox, what you're doing is you are shortening your working distance. Which some of the main benefits of that is you're bringing it closer to your diffuser, which is going to give you softer light. But also, when you're shortening your working distance, you can set the camera. If you're holding like a leaf or the stem, you can set your camera on your wrist. And because you don't have to move the camera forward to do the traditional stacking like other camera systems, you can set it there. And if you can kind of move it around to get that focus point right in front of it, you can just hit the shutter and then the camera does the rest. So this is one of the cleanest stacks. Coined it a unicorn stack because when I brought it into Helicon Focus from Lightroom, I let it go and it came out exactly like this. Usually what happens is you'll bring in a whole bunch of images into your stacking program and you're going to get either haloing. And what that is when you have like if you have the forelegs in front of another part, when you have objects at different focal planes, and those objects, when you're focusing on the other focal planes, are blurred out, bokeh, or that creates a problem because you're not going to have that detail. There's no data there to kind of render the detail in the back. So, but this one, everything was close enough. And I didn't have to touch it up at all, and just I couldn't believe how detailed it was coming out of the camera like that. So
yeah, it's crazy. Like the wings, you can see the whole. I'm looking at it on a giant monitor next to me, and it's just insanely detailed. It's so cool.
I was really happy with how it came out.
It's awesome. Oops. So, do you ever utilize like any of the focus assists? Because I see that it seems like you do a lot of manual focus. I think one of the questions was actually how you focus, but do you use like focus peaking or the magnify setting when you're focusing to make sure that you're really nailing it?
I had focus peaking set up for a while because I use that on my Nikon a lot, because the way I used to stack is I would watch that red focus peaking plane go through the subject. I don't actually use it as much with this camera system. I don't use the magnify. What I try to do is I'll look through the live view and I will get to a point where I see sharpness in the foremost part of the subject and I'll back it away. And I mean, in just a little bit, a tiny bit, and then I'll start the stack there. And I always have, I have so many photos of blurred out things because I haven't hit the actual subject yet. But I found on the fly, especially if you're working with something that you don't know if it's going to take off when, your first set of photos, like I found that that's an effective way to do things. And in the digital age, you just toss those photos where it's not focused. So, and I'm not really, and then it's different because I'm not going for single frames. If I was going for a single frame and I really wanted to make sure I nailed that eye, I probably would do that. But since I'm just running through the whole subject, I don't worry about it too much.
That makes sense.
So Real quickly, some macro tips. These are two of my most favorite images that I've created of all time. You have a tiger beetle on the left there, and you have a long-legged fly on the right. That fly was actually just taken last week. Actually, it was taken right before the that moth in the other picture there. But I just wanted to go through some quick things I get asked about a lot. And hopefully you can find some value in them. Starting off with something I touched on already, good lighting. So when I first started, and I keep all my photos on Instagram, so you can go back to when I first started August of 2020. My photos aren't great, and I thought they were really good. They're not that great. And I was experimenting with different ways to light the subject at the time. It wasn't until I got a dedicated macro diffuser. And it doesn't mean you have to purchase one. You can make one. I do feel like the way that the dedicated macro diffusers that you can purchase are designed, so you can make one similar to that. But it wasn't until I got that dedicated macro diffuser that I really noticed a difference immediately in just the overall composition, lighting, everything about the photos are just like, oh, okay, I see. This is how we do it from here on out. So I that's like the biggest thing for me is like if your photos are too contrasty, if the shadows are too deep, if your highlights are being blown out, really look into how those dedicated bug macro diffusers are designed and made, or just purchase one because those guys know what they're doing. And I love mine. Customizing your buttons and modes. I have all my C1, C2, C3. They're all customized for different scenarios. I sometimes, and then some, and if I need something completely different, I'll switch it into manual mode. But if I'm shooting, if I want to do a deep stack, I have C1. If I want to do a not so deep stack, I have C2. If I'm doing natural light, so I have something set up because you never know what you're going to run into, and you're not always going to have that time to prepare for to shoot the way you want. So having those customized modes set up really is beneficial, especially with how rare it can be to run into something. Maybe you see it and it's hanging out there for 15-20 seconds. Being able to just go in there, go right to the mode it's going to work best, and shoot is very advantageous. Like I touched on, shooting in the dark, really, if you've never tried it, and you have a flash, and you have a diffuser, and you have a flashlight, I give it a shot. You'll find things on leaves, under leaves, low-hanging trees, bushes, and flies are just like they're just hanging out and just waiting for some sunlight, waiting for some warmth. I'm not an entomologist. I don't know why they hang out, but you'll find things all over the place. Find your comfort magnification. That's a big thing for me. When I come up to a subject, I know exactly where I'm putting the magnification on that 60 millimeter because I know my working distance, and I know exactly where I need to start or how I need to position myself and how many frames I need to complete a stack. So just kind of, and let's just get used to your camera, get used to your gear. It's all kind of the same philosophy. Smaller is better when you start with focus stacking. That's definitely something. 1 year ago, I could probably look up conversations. I would tell people that are doing focus stacks that I'm never ever going to try it. I'm not good at it because I would always start with like 15 images, 20 images. I try to load them into Photoshop, and just nothing would work out. Start with 2 images. Start with 3. And sometimes that's a big difference maker because sometimes you can get the eyes, you can get some detail in front of the eyes, you can get a little bit of detail in the back, and the focus fall off, especially with the OMSYSTEM.Cameras. The focus fall off is so natural that you can do that, and it's not going to look like a weird image. So really give it a shot with just like 2 images. And if you're already editing with Lightroom and you pay for like the Photoshop suite, so you can stack in Photoshop. It's pretty simple. Just gotta look it up. It's just like 2 or 3 steps. Another editing tip: nature is yellow, sunlight's yellow, flashes are yellow. There's a lot of images that my images, especially starting out, were very warm. I didn't realize they were warm. If you are looking at your images and there's a lot of grass, there's a lot of greenery, and it's just like it just doesn't look as clean or as crisp as I want it, try sliding the warmth, a little bit to the blue. I do it a lot. Sometimes I even adjust the hue of my greens to be less yellow and more blue. And it's even if it's not how nature is actually represented, it's kind of how I see it in my head. So I have no problem. I try not to take things too far, but it's definitely something that I feel like brought my images to another level. When you're with editing, polishing software, so I always use Topaz denoise, even if there's not a lot of noise. I will use denoise, and within denoise, I will use clear AI. There's 4 algorithms in there. I will use clear AI, and I will do medium denoise, medium sharpen, and I don't know what it does, but it is a magic thing, and it cleans your image up, and it makes it so sharp, and it's not unnatural, and it really holds up under magnification if you're blowing up your photos. Whereas I have some issues with sharpen. Sometimes it kind of sharpens areas that shouldn't be sharp, and but I highly recommend giving that a shot. I'd recommend that to everyone that asks me like what I do at the end of my edits. And lastly, within this, try not to rush and edit. I have a lot of things that I have rushed to post that, especially if it's a once in a lifetime encounter, or it's something that was a rare encounter, or something you spent a lot of time stacking in Helicon, or whatever software. Like, don't rush to get it out the door. Take a look at it, maybe even screenshot it or bring it to your phone and compare it to some other images you posted or other images you like from other people. Kind of look at the colors, look at the brightness, because more than once I've posted something and be like, oh, well, this is definitely way too dark. And by that time, like, a few people have commented because you noticed too late, and you're like, well, I'm not going to pull it from like Instagram, and it's like, all right, well, this is what it is. So just try not to rush and edit, and give it the time and dedication, it took to take that photo in the first place, put that into the editing.
Nice. Good job. You made it through.
Thanks. I made it through.
I think we made it to the end.
Oh my God, I took so much time.
Sorry. No, it's okay. But I am going to say Ben is going to stick with us, and he's going to be hanging out on YouTube. And Ben, if you want to answer there's a couple of really good questions for you in the chat. Do you think you could chat some questions so we can get our next guest on? Because we are running a little over time, which is totally cool. We do it every episode, and I love all of you guys that hang out with us the whole time and stick with us. So stay with us to the end, because we have another guest that's going to come on. Are you excited to meet Tiffany? Awesome. Well, Ben, I want to thank you for your time and for joining us. And I'm glad that we have met and become Instagrams on the OM System channel, and that we're able to share out your images, and that you were able to be a part of this tonight. I'm really excited.
Seriously, thank you so much. It was definitely not expected invite, and it's such an honor. And I'm just glad to be part of this system and this company. So thank you.
Awesome. I'm so excited. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in a little while. Thank you, Ben. All right. So next guest, we're going to totally switch gears. Everything's changing. Bear with us. Stick with us. I know we're running late, but we are going to take a look at some wildlife photography now. So far away, hopefully we want to stay pretty far away from our wildlife friends. So let me introduce Tiffany. Tiffany, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here tonight. I'm really excited to see some of your photography. I've shared it a few times throughout the years. Love your style of work. I'm going to bring up your slides, but could you tell us a little bit about like where you're from and kind of what got you into photography?
Yeah, so I am originally from outside of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So quite literally the opposite of where I currently reside, which is in Jackson, Wyoming. So in terms of landscape and weather, very, very different. So I live about 15 minutes from Grand Teton National Park and about a little over an hour from Yellowstone. So growing up in Florida didn't lend to the most adventurous lifestyle. My family definitely appreciated nature, but we weren't out every weekend exploring. And so it wasn't until about high school that I started getting into scuba diving and started taking photos with my GoPro underwater. And looking back on the photos, they're absolutely terrible, but that's kind of what got me into my passion for wildlife. And so after graduating high school, I went to school for photography and then graduated and moved to Jackson, Wyoming, and then absolutely fell in love with wildlife photography once I was out here. Yeah, I started going out with a friend of mine and had an 85mm. I actually started shooting with Canon first. And after I would go out every day, I was like, like if I invested in a telephoto lens, I could actually take some good images. And so I invested and then switched over to Olympus later on, which I'll touch on later in my presentation. But I've only been doing wildlife photography for about a year and a half. As I show pictures of bears and wolves and all sorts of other animals, I think it's important to say that, you know, anyone can really do this. And those images I feel like daunting and unrealistic. But if you put in the time and you have wildlife available to you, you can definitely do it.
I actually really like that you just said that, because I didn't really know that both you and Ben were kind of new to your subject matter, which is kind of mind blowing, because as you'll see as we go through Tiffany's photos and we saw with Ben's photos, they're so impressive, like better than what I'm doing. And I would aspire to be a photographer like you, but it's really refreshing to know that you're relatively new to it as well. And that means that, you know, anyone could take the time and practice and learn how to make these images, which is really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're standing on the outside of it, I think it can feel impossible and like you need to do this for years and years. So yeah, just wanted to say that.
Awesome. Well, I think next up I'm going to share some of your gear. So let's talk about that first, and then we'll get into some of your photography.
Awesome. Yeah. So I shoot with the EM1 Mark III. And about 95% of the time, I have my 300mm f4 Pro, and that's equivalent to a 600mm. And so typically when you're shooting large animals or wildlife, you know, you need that extra focal length. So as much as I really love some of my other lenses, my 300 kind of lives on my camera. So especially for wolves and bears and things. Then the other 4% of the time, I would say that I have the 50 or the 40 to 150 2.8. And so typically I'll switch over to that lens if, you know, light is dwindling or I still want to take photos and videos and the conditions aren't great, or if I'm shooting for my car window. But typically, you know, you can't be that close to wildlife and be shooting at, you know, 150 or 300mm. And then 1% of the time, I'd say I have the 7 to 14mm on when I'm doing landscapes, but that's not too often. And then I also put down that I have the 100 to 400. I still do own it. I don't really use it all too much anymore. So that was the lens that I actually started out with when I switched over to Olympus. And so it's a phenomenal starter lens. And even if I were to use it now, it's a great lens. But I think it is great for beginners because it allows you to try out different focal lengths and see what works best for you. And 300 falls in there, that 600 range. So you can see if you like that before kind of investing in the 300. But that lower aperture definitely does help for wildlife when they typically come out early morning, early evenings. And then the last thing that I have on there is just extra batteries, memory cards, lens wipes, and then my favorite thing is I'm kind of always unprepared when it comes to batteries. So I have this little thing that plugs into the cigarette lighter, and you can actually plug in any wall outlet into it. So I charge a lot of my batteries while I'm driving to locations. So that is my most important piece of gear.
That's funny because somebody just asked, what kind of portable charger do you use?
I don't know what it is. I bought it at Best Buy, and it just simply plugs into a cigarette lighter and then has a slot for a wall plug-in.
Yeah, I have one of those in my car too. And then I also always have my EM1 Mark III or my OM1 charging also simultaneously in the USB port. I'm just like, I'm also unprepared when it comes to batteries. I'm really excited when I pack my bag, and I pack in a horrible way. So I'm like, yes, we're going. Oh, there's 23%. We're going for a little bit.
Yes,
All right. Awesome. Let's see some of your photos. Let's see what we got. Ooh, I love that. Oh,
Thank
that's
you.
cool.
So I have this one as kind of the first images to show because these were both taken on the same day. So this was taken when I first started out with that 100 to 400. And so you can see the difference between 100 and then 800 or 100 and 400. So these images tell completely different stories and evoke different emotion when you look at them. So this one on the right that is being shown right now, I also cropped in pretty extensively so that the focus was on the elk. I also did kind of different edits with these, so you can see that reflected in both images. So the one on the left is a little bit warmer, the one on the right is a little bit cooler, but the reason why the telephoto is great is because you can make different scenes, and my biggest tip is to kind of make the most of your subject while it's in front of you. So living in the Tetons, moose can become, kind of mundane. You see them everywhere, but if you have an animal in front of you, you can get creative, change your angle, get down on the ground, or zoom in and out. So that's kind of one of the biggest tips that I have when it comes to shooting wildlife.
That's really awesome.
So, yeah. On the next slide, I do have some tips on where to find wildlife. So unfortunately, the biggest tip that I have for finding wildlife is not some easy, simple solution, but it's just to know your subject and know your landscape. So for example, if you wanted to photograph moose in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, you may need to know some things about moose, like where do they hang out, what do they eat? And moose love to eat willows, they love aquatic vegetation, twigs, and so where would you find willows and aquatic vegetation? So typically near marshy areas, rivers, ponds, things like that. So if you go to those areas and you look for tracking sign from a moose, it might lead you to the right area. So if you didn't know what moose like to eat or where they hang out, it might make your mission of photographing moose really frustrating. So on this day, for the left image, we had gone out looking for moose. We kind of knew that they were hanging out behind this marshy area. And so this bull moose in velvet was basically just standing there stripping willows, having himself an evening snack. And so we were standing in the water with him, photographing him this evening, but kind of a perfect example of an animal in their habitat. And so when you go over to the image on the right-hand side, that is a black bear on an aspen tree, and those bushes kind of in the front framing the shot are actually berry bushes. And so this black bear was up on an aspen trying to reach for berries that he couldn't get from the ground. So absolutely hilarious watching him, but we had gone on a walk that evening to look for hopefully bears, and we knew that there were tons of berry bushes in these areas. When we got back to the parking lot, this guy was on a tree that was right off of the parking lot, and he was just snacking away. And so we went to the right area and then found black bears. So just kind of a story of where you can go to find black bears. And then the center image is a saw-whet owl. And so I included this one because I think it exemplifies why we need to also learn about our subjects. So when it comes to saw-whet owls, I don't have the best advice on how to find them because they are expert camouflagers. So I'm pretty sure we walked by this guy a few times before we actually spotted him, but owls tend to be pretty sensitive to human presence. And so if we are lucky enough to find or photograph a saw-whet owl or a great gray owl, and we are flushing the owl, we're walking up and standing in the meadow that they're hunting in, or we're even making calls to that owl so that they'll look at the camera, which I've seen all of the above, then we're not really respecting that animal or its habitat or its natural behavior. So when we have really sensitive species like this, we need to be really careful and educate ourselves about the animals so that we know what to do when we're around them. And so I really think that a respected animal is a photogenic animal. And so nobody wants a picture of a terrified looking animal. So this will not only improve your photographs, but also leave everyone happy in the situation.
And probably keep you slightly safer.
Yes, exactly. Especially when it comes to larger animals. So I think our little guys get a little bit more abused because we're not as fearful of them.
Right.
Yeah. So on the next slide, I have another quick tip on how to find wildlife, which is tracking. So I kind of touched on that a little bit with the moose shot, which is you can go to a certain area that you think wildlife might be in, and then you can look for track and sign. And so all these images I've taken out in the field, but one big suggestion is there is a company called Cyber, and I took one of their classes this spring, and some of the photos are actually from that class. And so I think they offer classes internationally as well, but this will just help you, learn more about your animals, your subjects, and what's going on the landscape. Yeah. And so on the next one, I have kind of a little bit about fleeting moments. So all these moments were super quick that happened. You had to be in the right place at the right time. And so the image on the left-hand side, I had spent our break from work, which was about a week and a half we had off during off season. And I went out and spent almost every day from sunrise to sunset looking for wolves. And so about 40 hours in 1 week, and this was the payoff. So these wolves were bedded down in some sage flats, and when they stood up, they walked over to this ridge, which was exactly where I was hoping that they would go. And then this raven that was sitting on some sage took off, flew, and just lined up perfectly with this black wolf. So this wasn't photoshopped. It was just the right time. And it's one of my favorite images because of the intimate relationship between wolves and ravens.
This is probably my favorite photo on your entire Instagram, just because of the sheer luck of timing of this image is magnificent. As soon as you posted it the first day, I was like, oh, that is the one. It's so amazing. Somebody wants to know, actually, do you use the Pro Capture feature on subjects like this? Were you using Pro Capture or?
So I do use Pro Capture sometimes, especially for birds. But in this image, I was not expecting this to happen. So I was just kind of jamming away on my shutter when this bird took off. But yeah, so in some images, if I think it'll be useful.
That checks out.
Yeah.
Right.
So the middle image is also just a really meaningful image. This was when I went to Churchill this fall. And so I think this image is really cool because it is really cropped in. So this was taken at 600 millimeters and then heavily cropped because the moment was the yawn. And so I didn't want any other bits of the landscape kind of distracting from the image. And so I wanted to go to Churchill since I was a little kid. So this image is really meaningful and one of my favorites. Yeah, and then the one on the right-hand side is a howling coyote. And this was taken also kind of from the end of winter this last year. And so it was mating season, and these two coyotes were howling at each other from across the road. And when I took this image, I actually didn't really think anything of it. I just took it for some guests that I was with. And when I got home and downloaded it and started editing, I really liked the tones and the neutral tones that were in it because I'm not a huge color person, which I don't know if that comes across in my editing, but I kind of like more muted colors. Yeah. And on the next slide, kind of going off of the fleeting moments, and I think it kind of portrays wildlife photography and how quickly, things can change, or, if you head out late, you might stumble into an animal or you might miss something incredibly epic. And so on this day, I had overslept for sunrise, and I wasn't feeling like getting out of bed, and I was so mad at myself. And so I finally got out there. I'm driving along the highway, and I see all of these ravens in the sagebrush. And I thought, that's kind of weird. So I slammed on my brakes, pulled over, and started looking with binoculars. And I noticed this black wolf. And it was sitting there for about 15 to 20 minutes before it actually crossed the highway and went down into some trees and out of sight. So I was like, okay, well, this is it. It's over. And so later that day, I got a text message saying that this black wolf was back out. And so it had crossed the highway again. So I went out to look for it. I'd been looking for about an hour with binoculars, didn't have any success. So I decided to switch locations to get a different angle. And so I kind of noticed something in the distance. It was super, super small. Didn't know if it was even a wolf or a raven, and kind of saw it moving. And so I was like, okay, that has to be the wolf. And waited probably about 45 minutes to an hour before it actually made its way over towards the road. And so this image was actually taken from my car window. So even though it looks entirely wild, it was taken from the safety of my car. And so there's this sagebrush in the front. And while I was taking this image, I thought, oh, it's absolutely ruined. The sagebrush is in focus. And it wasn't until I got home and downloaded the image that I noticed that everything was in focus. And so sometimes these little mistakes that we make within wildlife photography can definitely make or break an image. So that's kind of a story about that image. And then I have kind of another story about how fleeting wildlife can be in the next one, and how time you spend outside, the more time or the better photos that you will get. So this is 399 and her 4 cubs. And so I had taken a photo of all 4 of them, or all 5 of them, last spring when they were about 1 year old. And so I really wanted to get a photograph of all 5 of them together this spring. And I wasn't really willing to camp out every single day waiting for them to wake up from hibernation. I also have a job, so I have to go to that. And so on the day that she actually came out of hibernation, I happened to be up north about 3 minutes away from the location that she was at. So I hustled up there and was able to take this photograph, but just kind of being in the right place at the right time. And that's kind of like the message that I'm sending. And the more time that you put into it, the better results that you'll get. And so on the next slide, I have a little bit of editing stuff. So this is definitely one of my more dramatic edits. So I don't edit all my photos this much, but I loved this moment between these 2 bison. And so I really, really wanted to make an edit or something come out of this image. And so I needed to get rid of that blue background. So in order to achieve this, I used a lot of masking. And so that's one of my biggest tips when it comes to editing. So I selected the subject, which is, I believe, in one of the latest Lightroom updates. We kind of got that advancement, and it's really, really helpful. So when I select the subject, I increased exposure, increased shadows, and kind of brought up those highlights as well. And then I also selected the subject, but then inverted it. So it selected everything but the bison. And so from there, I was able to brighten the sky and kind of turn down that contrast. I used a linear gradient at the bottom left-hand corner to darken some of that soil there. So I found it to be really distracting. Your eye gravitated there because it was a little bit lighter than the bison. And so that's something that I did in order to kind of draw your eye into the moment that was happening. I also used the brush tool to go in and kind of highlight and bring up the whites and the shadows within the eye, the nose, the tongue, and the horns. So that kind of draws the eye in as well. And then used a very, very minimal radial filter kind of just over the face of the 2 bison to kind of draw in that eye as well. So those are kind of just a few tips about editing, but everyone has their own style. And I know that sometimes dramatic editing is frowned upon within wildlife, but this is just my style of how I do it. And so on the next slide, oh, go ahead.
No, someone just had a question. Are you a back button focuser?
I am not, but that's something I want to definitely try out a little bit more moving forward.
I am so comfortable with my front button that it does. Every now and then I try, especially when I do like birds in flight, but it's not there for me. It's not it. It's a personal thing. I think if you're a back button person, you're a back button person.
I feel like you're comfortable with, or you were taught with.
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And whatever you can do the fastest. For me, it's so foreign to use my back button that I'm actually quicker at recomposing and focusing with the front button. So yeah, it is what you are raised with, I think, or what you learn on.
Yeah.
Awesome. So another editing shot. I love this one. I think I know where you were when you took this one because this area seems very familiar.
Yes, similar to some other shots you've probably seen. Yeah,
That
so
trip looked fun.
oh, it was. It was the best day trip ever. So this is a kind of another fleeting moment as well. So this day, this bobcat actually ran out behind a truck that we were driving behind, and so if we had been 2 seconds later or 2 seconds earlier, we would have missed the entire moment. And so the biggest tip that I have here is really just taking your time when editing. It's actually kind of a spin-off of some advice from a former English teacher for writing, which is when you're done with a piece of work, you don't look at it for at least 24 hours, if not more. And so by doing that, you know, you're allowing there to be some space between you and your work. So if you're too close to your art, typically you can't see the mistakes within it. So a lot of times when I go back after editing, I'm like, oh my goodness, that's a lot of saturation, or that's too much contrast. And so then it's really obvious to me. So that's kind of one of my biggest tips. And then here I used a lot of the healing tool to get rid of the branches in the background. So I found those to be really distracting, and I wanted the focus to be obviously on the bobcat. I used a lot of dehaze in the background and some brush tool for the eyes and the nose. So this bobcat had a lot of snow on its kind of right between its ears and then on the tip of its nose right there. And so by turning up the contrast and the highlights on those, it kind of, you know, just brought some focus in there. And then another thing here was that I kind of did after the fact. When I was done editing it, I went back in and used the healing tool and the dehaze tool to actually soften that snow in the front. So I couldn't stand it. It was drawing my eye in and it was taking away from the bobcat. And I'm not sure how I did it all in Lightroom. Probably should have taken it into Photoshop, but I'm kind of happy with how it came out. And so it was just a ton of different layers within Lightroom.
I'm impressed that you did that in Lightroom because I definitely thought this was a Photoshop edit. That's
I'm impressed with myself. I don't know if I went back and did it again, I probably couldn't do it. So I guess I was just feeling really motivated that
day. Well, it's beautiful. I love the softened snow. I would have not thought personally to edit that, but like seeing it, it seems much more dreamy and like drawing you towards this adorable bobcat. I love it.
Yeah, and then just a few other like quick tips and things is that I mostly shoot in aperture priority instead of manual. And so the reason why I do that is I just find when you're shooting wildlife, elements are changing so much that it's better if you can just kind of focus on a few elements within your camera, and it kind of narrows it down so that you can focus on your subject and composing your subject within the frame. Using Pro Capture, like we kind of talked about a minute ago, and then continuous shutter mode is really important for fast moving animals. And lastly, just kind of slow down and get eye level with your subjects. So, you know, get down on the ground, lay on the floor, and just, you know, try to be in the moment as much as possible. And it's not always about the photo. It's just about the experience. And I think that shows through in your work if you're just having fun.
Oh, I love that. Oh, that was a great, that was like the best ending point like we could have had. Amazing work.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having us.
I'm really excited. These were both really awesome, completely opposite. I really enjoy having complete opposites on the show because it's like you get completely different perspectives. Question for you, and I ask this to all of my wildlife photographers. What animal is on your bucket list to photograph that you've never had a chance to yet?
Ooh. Well, I would say Alaskan brown bears, which I'm going to go photograph next month. And I would say beluga whales. Yeah.
Beluga whales. No one's ever said that one before.
Awesome. Okay,
you win.
perfect.
You win. No one's ever gone that. That was great. So thank you so much for your time, Tiffany. And if you aren't following Tiffany on Instagram or Ben, you should be following both of them because They have really inspiring work, very fun, just enjoyable to look at. I'm always excited to see what you post next. And also great stories because you're also traveling. What is your job? What do you do for work? I feel like
Yeah,
you're always outdoors.
I am a wildlife guide. So I have the most perfect job, in my opinion.
Right. So if you need a wildlife guide, you know that Tiffany will be your wildlife guide. Awesome. Well, have a great night, Tiffany. I'm going to let you go. I'm going to say goodbye to the group. And I just really want to thank you for your time and sharing your images and your tips with us.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for showing up tonight.
Okay, guys, you made it through. I know we're 11 minutes over, but I still see all of you guys on here, and I appreciate the dedication to hanging out with us and learning with us. We'll be back again in August. It's going to be a little bit different in August, though. I'm not going to go on the last Thursday of the month because if you are unaware, August 19th is World Photography Day. And if you joined us last year, you know that it was all day live streams, crazy classes with all kinds of ambassadors in like 7 languages. So we're going to be bringing that back to you again this year. So please mark your calendar, save the date, August 19th. We will be doing a whole crazy thing for World Photography Day. We'll have classes with our tech experts, with our ambassadors, photo contests on Instagram. There's going to be all kinds of stuff. I'm losing track of my thoughts. It's the end of my night. But definitely mark your calendar for that. We will have it up on our events page coming shortly. You'll be able to register or look at all the class offerings. I believe we have about 6 different languages already set up and ready to go. So we'll see you again next month. And just thank you guys all for being so awesome and uplifting down there in the comment section when we do these things. I really say this every month, but we have the best viewers, the best customers, the best community. Our photographers are so great. And we wouldn't do this if we didn't have you. So thank you for being here with us every week or every month. See you next time.